East Idaho Newsmakers is brought to you by the Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.
This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Welcome to East Idaho Newsmakers. Thanks for being with us this week. Today we are speaking with Matt Smith. He is the executive director of Operation Shield, a local organization aimed to prevent sex trafficking involving children and try, I guess more than prevent, but deal with it after it occurs, right?
That's correct.
So give us a little bit of background on your organization, what exactly you guys do and how it was founded.
So Operation Shield works to prevent, rescue, and treat victims of child sex trafficking. We also work with adults. We'll take whoever comes our direction, but our focus is on children. We started about 4 years ago doing international work, and then saw that there was a need locally, and we've tried to divide our time now both internationally and local.
So when you think of sex trafficking, at least me, I think, oh, that's happening overseas, in other countries, maybe in other states, but East Idaho, no way. Yet we were saying before we started to record, you've had 22 cases this year in East Idaho.
There are 22 cases of either child sex trafficking or child exploitation so far this year in Southeast Idaho.
And those are the ones that have been caught.
Yes.
Those are the ones that the authorities know about.
And the rule of thumb that we go by is that for every one that's recovered, there's probably at least 5 more out there waiting to be recovered.
Why and how is this happening here?
Well, Southeast Idaho unfortunately produces a lot of child porn. And that's a big problem that we have here. Why is it happening? My feeling is that this is a result of decades of us sexualizing our children. When you understand the biological effects on the brain and how pornography plays into that, what we're creating is a generation, and probably multiple generations, of children who have very aggressive basic instincts, and one of those being the sexual drive and aggression, with a reduced frontal lobe, frontal cortex, which reduces impulses. So you have, as a result, a very aggressive, sexually charged generation that are coming up. And until we change that aspect of our culture, it's going to continue to be worse.
And that is such a huge thing to change.
It is huge.
How do you do that? Where do you start?
Well, I mean, we have to start in the homes, okay? We have to talk to our children about pornography and take a little while and understand what those long-term impacts of pornography are on children. It's devastating. You just had an article on East Idaho News about a gentleman that has a sex addiction, okay? Those things happen because of early exposure to child pornography, or pornography in general, as a child. And it grows and becomes more and more out of control for these individuals. A certain amount of those individuals are going to act out those impulses, and even more will become deviant in that acting out. And those are the ones that are getting into producing and viewing child pornography.
And it is so easy these days with a device in your hand. You could make a video, post a video within seconds, and access a video for, you know, every kid that's at a school right now that has a smartphone can pull it up.
What people in the general public don't understand is the child porn industry is a huge industry. There's a lot of money involved in it. And there is an economic incentive as well as a biological incentive for these folks that are addicted to it to continue to consume and produce it. So, I mean, that's another part of that equation. You mentioned having handheld devices. One of the statistics that I share with teachers and parents, the Pew Research Center did a study on junior high and high school kids, and they showed that nationally 30% of our kids are either sending or receiving a sex message. Okay, this is a reflection of the sexualization of our children. Okay, on my end of the spectrum, it's also a very dangerous way for our youth to get sucked into sex trafficking. And we have got to, as a community, pull our head out of the sand and realize that we have to talk to our kids and help them get past these problems while they're young, because if they continue into adulthood, you get more and more deviant.
It's interesting you say that, because you mentioned a story that we put up about a guy that had a sex addiction. I honestly don't know which one that was, because it seems like there's so many. And people are saying often, why do you guys cover those? Why do you we don't want to hear about that. But on the other hand, you can't not cover it to show that this is an issue. I mean, this is not an issue that seems to be going away. This is an issue that's happening in our backyards with males, females, kids 18 to 95. I mean, we had an elderly gentleman accused of these crimes. Yeah. So it is something that is very real. You know, when I think of sex trafficking, I think of children in a van in the cover of darkness, you know, swapping in some dark parking lot somewhere. But is that what's happening here more so, or how is it working now?
Well, part of that is dependent on how you define it. We define it in a way that includes sexual exploitation of children. So if child pornography is developed and then sold or traded, we count that as trafficking, okay? Trafficking, though, occurs in many different ways. It's not uncommon for parents to trade kids for drugs or other items. It's not uncommon for, actually probably the most common ways for kids 12 to 16. They're getting sucked into this by a boy that they've met online. They think that they have fallen in love with this guy. They've never met this guy, but they run away and go live with this guy, and it's not very long after that that they tend to get put out for sale. That's a very common way that the teens are getting sucked into it. You also have, with adults, you have women that are in really bad situations and need money. That happens. When you're in that kind of situation, it's not long before a pimp will start taking possession of you one way or another. So there's many different ways that girls get sucked into it, and it's not just girls, it's boys as well. But it's very, very damaging to the victims. We see high levels of what we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where these women are brutalized over and over again, but they're convinced that they can't escape. So many times we hear people say, well, why don't they just leave? They don't believe they can do that. And that's what keeps them in the business.
And I would imagine if you start a child when they're young, that's their life. That's all they know. That's normal to them.
Right, yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, I want to talk about how your organization is helping law enforcement all around the state, and also what parents can do to hopefully, prevent this from happening, at least getting their children involved in pornography or whatnot. So we'll discuss that when we come back.
At the Bank of Commerce, we understand the hard work, determination, and sacrifice it takes to run a successful business. That's why we're here every step of the way to help make your dreams come true. The Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.
Welcome back to East Idaho Newsmakers. Today we're talking with Matt Smith. He is the Executive Director of Operation SHIELD, a local organization that works to prevent and treat victims of child sex trafficking. You guys go out and work with law enforcement a lot and train them. Describe what you do and how that works.
Our philosophy is that we don't want to reinvent the wheel, okay? But what we do want to do is increase the capacity in local communities. So, for example, we were receiving a lot of information from law enforcement that they didn't have adequate training on how to work with victims of sex trafficking. And a couple of officers that reported that they knew they came across it, but they didn't know how to respond to it, type thing. So what we have taken on is the role of bringing in trainers to a local community, including Idaho Falls, where we bring these experts in and train local law enforcement. So we just did a training on the 27th of October, had approximately 70 officers from southeast Idaho and western Wyoming, which we felt was a very good turnout.
And what are you specifically telling them, this is what you should do should you come across a child victim? What are you training them on?
So they are being trained on identification, response, and investigations of sex trafficking. So the idea is to give them the skills to recognize it and conduct a proper investigation when they come across it. We also train therapists around the country on how to work with victims of sex trafficking. Many therapists hold the belief that these are just going to be typical post-traumatic stress disorder type clients. These are post-traumatic stress disorder on steroids. Okay, it's a complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So that occurs when somebody is continually being traumatized in an environment where they don't feel they can escape from. And that hits these girls perfectly, okay? So we teach different methods on how to work with these victims so that they can be effective when these victims are rescued. So the way we approach it is we'll go into a community first and train the mental health community, okay? Second, we train law enforcement. And then third, we build a collaborative team within a community so when victims are discovered, there are wraparound services for the victims.
So let's say that you do come across a child who's been abused for years sexually, and you take this child to a counselor. What's the first thing you do? I mean, you mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder on steroids. I mean, how do you treat that? How do you even start?
Well, I'm not a clinician, okay? The first thing is understanding where the victim's coming from and building that relationship. If you don't have that relationship, they will close down and you won't get good information to provide therapy. We work very closely with Bob Stahn. He's our clinical director from Wellspring Counseling. He has a technique that he trains that is very effective in eliminating the trauma responses very quickly so we can get into the deeper issues with the kids. So, that technique is called brief imagery reprocessing and restructuring therapy, and have seen that work miracles in kids very, very quickly.
How did you get involved with this group?
Well, I've had 25 years working in children's mental health and have always loved working with children. I'm not a clinician, but more of an administrator. Back in 2010, Mike Adams and Doug Andrus and I and Nick Thompson started a program called Prosperity Project, where we were providing medical care to the victims in Haiti after the earthquake. And we're doing that for a couple of years, and then was approached by Operation Underground Railroad to provide therapy to some kids that they had rescued in Haiti that didn't have treatment. So we started providing the treatment for
Here
the
in
kids
East Idaho.
in Haiti.
In Haiti, you actually went there. Okay.
Yeah, so then we actually embed therapists in group homes or orphanages. And then as we were doing that, we started seeing the signs here locally, and we said, hey, we're not going to ignore our own backyard. And we started retooling a little bit to work here.
Wow. There's going to be parents watching, well, anyone watching, not just parents, that think they might know someone who's being sexually abused, but they're not sure. What should they do?
They should call law enforcement, okay? There is actually a law that requires you to report child abuse if you think it's happening, okay? So it can come back on you if you don't report, okay? That being said, that's the first step. Through that process, then law enforcement will reach out to us, and it's a little bit of a lengthy process, unfortunately, at this point, to get kids into care. It's just the bureaucracy hasn't adjusted yet to this new reality. However, I will say this, that there are services available in Southeast Idaho for victims of sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. Seek it out. You can go to our website and contact us directly. We can walk you through that. And to adult victims, we have services that can help you leave that life without any trace. And it's a very good opportunity for you to get a new start.
And for those parents that might find child porn on their kid's phone or laptop or tablet, and they don't really want to go to the police because it's their child.
Right.
What advice or counsel do you have for them?
My advice is if your child is having child porn on their electronics device, this is not an entry point type of pornography. They didn't get there by accident, and that child needs help. They need therapy to overcome that. And it won't be a short-term therapy, unfortunately. With kids, their brains are not developed. So when the effects of pornography hit, they tend to hit pretty strong, and they need to be in therapy to get over that, because you will regret it when they get older. I'm very confident of it.
Yeah. Well, it's a heavy topic. It's a serious issue, but one that needs to be, paid attention to. Again, 22 cases of sex trafficking and or sexual exploitation cases involving children this year here in East Idaho. I don't even know what the numbers are nationwide or worldwide. I mean,
we average about 250,000 just in the United States every year.
250,000.
Yeah.
It's an issue that we all should be paying attention to, and one that hopefully, with the help of your organization, can make somewhat of an impact to get that number to go down. Matt Smith, thanks so much for being in here, the Executive Director of Operation Shield. We will post links to some other resources available in the story below. If you want more information, check that out. Thanks for watching. Have a good week.
East Idaho Newsmakers is brought to you by the Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.